everyone, and welcome to what should be a fascinating session. We've got, thanks to Lynn, who's put this together, we've got three top people from Willamette Valley who are going to tell us about how sparkling wine does wonderfully there. And I think it's an area we don't know enough about until after this session. We're only a small number at the moment. I hope there will be a few more joining in shortly. But one consolation for our speakers, I think, is even if there aren't too many people watching today, we do record them, put them up, these sessions, put them up on the website. And we've had some very, very high attendance, well, people looking at them again afterwards. So if it's only a select few today, it will be a lot more later, I hope. But over to Lynn and to our three speakers.
Thanks, Liz. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce today's panelists, three of Willamette Valley's most respected sparkling wine producers. Rollin Souls, winemaker and owner at Rocco Winery. Rollin was instrumental in founding the Oregon sparkling wine movement in 1987 when he built Argyle Winery, which some of you may have heard of. 30 plus years later, he continues to make highly regarded still and sparkling wines at his own project, Rocco Winery. Louisa Ponzi is the winemaker at Ponzi Vineyards, and Louisa was raised up in the Oregon wine industry, and after studying in Burgundy, helped Sister Maria grow Ponzi from 10,000 to 40,000 cases. Earlier this year, Bollinger purchased the winery, where Louisa remains in control. And finally, Kate Payne Brown, the winemaker at Stoller Family Estate. Kate came to wine after abandoning an intended career in optometry, and she moved to Australia for her master's degree in enology. After more than 15 years chasing vintages across the globe, she's firmly established her place at Stoller Family Estate. And so welcome, panelists. Thank you for being here today. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide.
There you go.
Hello?
Yep, hold on.
Next. Oh, thank you. So today we'll follow a timed agenda. Rollin will speak about the history of and reasons for choosing the Willamette Valley for sparkling production. Louisa will discuss viticulture, including the diversity of growing locations in the valley and harvest criteria. And Kate will conclude with styles of traditional method wines produced, processing, and dosage decisions. And afterwards, there will be time for questions. So let's get started. Next slide, please. Great. Before I turn the reins over to Rollin, just a quick lay of the land for those of you unfamiliar with the Willamette Valley and why it's so perfect for growing sparkling wines. Louisa will touch more on this in detail later, but briefly, the Willamette Valley runs along the same parallel as Champagne and Burgundy, the 45th. Like Champagne and Burgundy, it's a cool climate, as you can see by this picture of nearby snow-covered Mount Hood that's covered in snow all year round. And then the best vineyards for sparkling wine slope at higher elevations throughout the valley. So with that, take it away, Rollin. Next slide, please.
Well, let's stay on that. Let's go back to that slide. I like it, if you don't mind. One of the things, I mean, so many wineries or wine regions that are like, oh man, we're on this parallel and that parallel, and we're just like this part of that's famous, you know, the world that's famous. And so we're not saying we're on the 45th parallel because we're, you know, oh yeah, it goes through just south of the southern part of Burgundy. And so we got to make wines like Burgundy. What we're really saying by 45th parallel is that it's such a high parallel that at that latitude, you'll see real differences in elevation here. So just within 200 feet elevation, you can get 10 to 14 days difference in picking time. So that means that if you're picking, you know, on top of that, we can't really go above 800 feet. So call that, you know, what, 280 meters? You can't do it and get grapes ripe consistently. So just by being at the 45th parallel, we limit where we can grow grapes. Also in the Willamette Valley, it's one of the only wine regions, New World wine regions in the world that did not start planting in the valley floor. We started planting in the hillsides because the pioneers realized, oh man, on the valley floor, we'll never get fruit ripe. We're at the most northern extreme in North America where you can grow on the coast, where you can grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. If you drive north of Portland, Oregon, you won't see any vineyards growing Pinot or Chardonnay or anything else. So it's kind of cool to be at the high extreme. The other thing that's exciting about the 45th parallel is that we really do get seasonal changes here. That we really do see a real fall, a real winter, a real spring, and a real summer. And so in the fall, when daylight is decreasing, and those of you in Europe, you see this, Norway and especially in England, you're going to see real changes day to day in daylight length. And those huge changes in daylight length send a very clear message to the vines here in the Willamette Valley above the 45th parallel to giddy up and get things right. And what happens is the vines get the message, change the hormonal makeup, and all that photosynthate that they're producing in September, late August, September, and October will go by far and large to wood for next year, but also into fruit. And that's how we end up with this perfect conditions where for sparkling wine, the secret squirrel is to get ripe fruit expression without losing high natural acidity. That means that we are going to ripen in September, sometimes October. 2011, we have ripened in November for sparkling wine quality. And that's really significant. That's what makes us really special for growing grapes here. We don't grow Cabernet. We don't grow Merlot and Syrah and Zinfandel and Tempranillo successfully here in the valley. Our only red wine grape really is Pinot Noir, some Gamay, and those kind of varietals for red wine. And then white wines were Chardonnay and Pinot Gris dominant, and Riesling as well. So I just want to give you that big overall overarching deal. Like Lynn mentioned, the little mountain down there, Mount Hood, that's our eastern border for the Willamette Valley. The western border are the mountains right against the ocean. And where we grow grapes here is in the rain shadow of the coastal mountains. Cold Pacific Ocean, really cold, beautiful habitat for animals and fish and whales and crustaceans. But then those mountains receive about 100 inches of rain. We're in the rain shadow, we get 40 inches of rain per year, all in the wintertime, not in the summertime. And then as the weather moves across the valley, once it hits Mount Hood, that's 150 inches. And then east of Mount Hood, it drops down into the single digits, really high elevation desert plain. So most of Oregon is high elevation, sagebrush, junipers, and other mountain ranges. The Willamette Valley is just a teeny tiny bit of the entire state of Oregon. So there you go. Next one. So in the history, this is me telling the history from my perspective. The first sparkling wines I tried when I was in the master's program at Davis and came up to the Willamette Valley in 1979. Well, really it was in the early 80s later on. But a guy, Fred Arterberry, who's long gone now, a great guy, made a sparkling. He actually started making cider. It inspired him to make a sparkling fermented in the bottle Riesling, which wasn't too bad. And then Rich, a good buddy of mine and of Fred's, and he started making Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, very, very small amounts, all hand done. And you could just see the diamond in the rough to get things going. The thing about sparkling wine is that it requires a lot of capital in order to get it up going and doing it right. If you think about it, if you are a new entity making proper method champenois sparkling wine, if you have the right region, then you got to come up with the cash to grow the grapes, make the wine, and bottle it 4 times before you release your first wine, which is a lot of capital going into inventory. The second part about it is it's really difficult process to get it right. You do not want to pick at the wrong time. You don't want to process, improperly, and you certainly don't want issues when you ferment the wine. And then the mechanics of disgorging. It's a super complicated wine. And I've always said that because I'm made high quality sparkling wine, I can make high quality Chardonnay. And because I make high quality Chardonnay, I can make high quality Pinot Noir. It's not the other way around. Very few red winemakers want to venture into sparkling wine unless they get a leg up in some fashion. All right. Next. Yep, here we go. Started Argyle in 1987. And in 1987, Americans were not drinking Pinot Noir. And Louisa, will remember that a number of folks were tearing out Pinot Noir and putting in white varieties, including Pinot Gris, that they could, make a decent wine out of every year. It was really difficult to get consistent ripening of Pinot Noir here in the Willamette Valley. We only had 2 clones of Pinot Noir, which were selected really for the California climate, and 1 clone and 1 selection of Chardonnay that were selected for California as well. And we were own rooted, which means the grapes didn't have any less vigor because the rootstocks help devigorate the vines. And so it was tough, man. We had viticulture that came up from California, and that made it tough as well. And so when I arrived, we wanted to take over vineyards. Knudsen Vineyards was the first one that we connected to. Cal Knudsen became my long-term chairman of Argyle. And he was willing to, for us to completely rejigger his vineyard. And we started doing that in 1987. And vines don't change overnight. So it wasn't until 5 years into Argyle's history that we made our first red wine, Pinot Noir. In the meantime, we felt like this was the greatest spot in the New World to make sparkling wine. And we felt like we could get proper, consistent, high quality ripening with Chardonnay and Pinot for sparkling wine as you harvest those varieties earlier. And that's what caused us to start our sparkling wine program. One thing that I'm eternally grateful for, I felt like the redheaded stepchild here in the Willamette Valley when Christian Bizo, at the time chairman of Bollinger, came out and visited at least 3 times in the early days to taste through my Van Clairs before his untimely demise. And it was so exciting to taste Van Clair with Christian, and he knew right away, if I picked it the wrong time, if I processed it, pressed the wine improperly. And he looked at me on the 3rd visit, and he went, "You know what, Roland, I think this is the first New World region I believe can make sparkling wine that can age as long as Champagne." And that was a total surprise and really stimulatory to my efforts to make sparkling wine here in the Willamette Valley. Well, there we go. Next. I'm going to leave a lot of time for Louisa.
Thanks.
So here we are. This is, the original investors and viticulturists for Argyle. And it was without the capital that we came into the Willamette Valley. We were the first international investment, came from Australia to the Willamette Valley. The following year, Robert Duran came in with Mason Joseph Duran, which was exciting. And Alan and I farmed for Argyle, but we also farmed for Domaine Drouin as well. And it caused us to learn a heck of a lot about viticulture here. And the goal for me was always to show that the Willamette Valley could grow grapes and produce wines of consistent high quality year in and year out, because no one wants to enjoy wines where there's a lot of inconsistency. And it all started in the vineyard for all of us to get things going. All right, have another slide. Oh, there we are. So there we are. Most of our vineyards are hillside. Well, all of them basically, but very few on the valley floor. Valley floor, oh my goodness, it's the richest soil perhaps in North America. And my joke is you can grow anything except for bananas in that soil. And we have huge amounts of agriculture here. I encourage everybody to come out and drive or bicycle through the back roads of our Willamette Valley and just look at the plethora of agriculture that's here. But all of us, we ran for the hills, and we're looking for aspects that face east, as in this picture, looking east towards Mount Hood, which is a beautiful thing to see year round. Never get tired of it. It's got snow on it year round. If you took Mount Hood, for example, and you put it at the latitude of Mendocino, it would not have snow on it year round. So that's latitude again. East slopes, south slopes, some west slopes. West slopes are a little warmer because they get the hot afternoon sun. Very, very few wineries or vineyards are successful on the north slopes, unlike Napa and Mendocino. You can actually retard vineyard ripening if you're on the north slope here. Like I said before, no Merlot and Sauvignon Blanc and Tempranillo to speak of here in the Willamette Valley. It's all Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Gris, and Riesling. And people are dabbling with other cool climate varieties, but by far and large, it's Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir that have brought us to the world stage. All right, I don't know if I have another one here.
No, that's me.
See, how about that? All right, Louisa.
Okay. Well, I mean, I first want to say thank you to Rollin for bending Bollinger's ear all those years ago. And, they finally came here, and we were acquired this last May by Bollinger. And it had nothing to do with, I'd like to say it had something to do with my sparkling wine production, but it had absolutely nothing to do with it. I don't know that it's, it's in the back of their head because of Rollin, but certainly not the focus at this moment. And I'm hoping that eventually that, they'll turn their eye and kind of see what's happening here currently with sparkling wine. And I look forward to that. I wanted to talk about viticulture, and Rollin certainly hit on a lot of it. The 45th parallel is crucial. It's why we're a cool climate. It's why we planted Chardonnay and Pinot all those years ago. But I think, what we have to do now is kind of look specifically for the sites that are for high quality production of sparkling wine, which I think we're just beginning to do, even though, Argyle started all those years ago. I think my story with sparkling wine is probably similar to a lot of people. I made my first sparkling in 1996. It was a disaster. It was a miserable experience. And until like 2013, I was making sparkling wine on and off, kind of, celebratory occasions, a child was born, or, we planted a new vineyard, or there was an anniversary or something, along those lines. And as Rollin told me many, many times over the years, you can't make sparkling wine like that. That's not the way it works. You have to actually commit and learn. And I didn't start doing that until 2013. So I'm pretty new to the game, I would say, definitely. So it's kind of an honor to be here with Rollin and Kate, who both know more about sparkling than I do. But I think, I think that's where we are. I think that we're all kind of trying to catch up to where Argyle, oh shit. Did I lose you guys? To where Argyle started. I lost you for a second. So, we're all kind of trying to catch up and learn at this point, I feel like, and it's a long process, and it's I think one of the hardest things I've tried to do in my winemaking career. It's a paradigm shift from making still wine. So that said, the viticulture part of it, like I said, we're looking for those sites that are great for sparkling wine now. And a lot of people, I think, are still kind of taking their Pinot Noir or Chardonnay vineyard and saying, oh, I'll pick it 2 weeks early and I'll make sparkling wine. And you can, it's probably going to be a pretty decent rendition, but at the same time, for high quality, I think we really need to look at cooler sites. Where are the sites that are going to be the best? As Roland mentioned, we're already on the hills, so we have a huge advantage there. We already have the varietals in place, but where can we go that's going to really push the boundaries of harvest time, but still, get the fullest fruit expression that we can. And we can do that by going up the hillsides. We have the elevation. Our highest point in the Willamette Valley is about 1,600 feet. So we have the ability to keep going up the hills as the climate maybe gets a little warmer. I think, southeast exposure, yes, is still pretty important to get that fruit expression. I think, what I have, it's kind of an interesting, I probably have the ends of the spectrum of what you can do with Willamette Valley sparkling wine. I have a vineyard that's at 1,000-foot elevation that I make my Brut Rosé from. So there's a Pinot Noir vineyard that's at 1,000 feet at the very northern end of the valley. That is a site that is not appropriate for still wine, but for sparkling wine, it's turning out to be really, really nice. On the other end of the spectrum, my Chardonnay site is a 50-year-old planting that my parents planted way back when, 1970. Original planting of the older clone of Chardonnay in a very vigorous sandy soil, own rooted. Never was great for still wine Chardonnay, but it seems to be able to hold its acidity and really make a beautiful Blanc de Blanc. So I think there's a lot of room in there, but I think that's where we are right now, as we're looking for where can we go and choose the right sites for sparkling wine. I can go to the next slide. The varieties, like I said, we have Pinot and Chard planted. We know those work. Those are tried and true for sparkling wine. I think clones can play a role. You can delay the harvest, delay ripening by some of the different clone, the tools that we have with clones, looking at some of the older clones, I think can work pretty well. But some of the newer clones that we've had brought in the last couple decades can really kind of expand the fruit that we can get, the expression of fruit. Where we're lacking, I think, is in Pinot Meunier. And Rollins pointed this out, that there's not a lot planted here. We need to plant more. I think those people that have some planted have a clear advantage, the ability to kind of blend that in and add more layers and complexity to the wines. So that's something that I think in the future is going to be exciting for the sparkling wines here. But we're the new world, and we have the ability to play around. We have the ability to, we're not restricted and regulated as much as France. And so we have people here that are making sparkling wine from, Riesling or Pinot Blanc, or I had a Brut Rosé from a Dolcetto Brut Rosé this week that was, not bad. but people are playing around with all kinds of things and making sparkling out of all kinds of varietals. But I think for a really high quality sparkling wine from the Willamette Valley, we're still, going to depend on those classic varietals of Pinot, Chard, and Meunier. So that's where we are with varieties. The only other thing I wanted to talk about, the next slide, is kind of harvest. And I think this, to me, is one of the hardest things I've had to learn, and I still don't understand it. I still am learning a lot about the criteria for when you pick. And I know that the chemistry is crucial. I know that there's certain parameters for what you need in your pH and your TA to really ensure that you're going to have beautiful wines at the end of 4 or 5 years down the road. But it's that ability to walk out in the vineyard and taste the fruit or taste the juice before you pick. And really, what are you looking for? And I think, you know, this is something that I'm having a hard time with. I'm getting it every year. I get a little bit closer to where I can say, this is the moment. But for a still wine producer, it's a big shift. And so the Chardonnay, I think, Chardonnay is one that I think is a little more clone dependent. You know, I'm working with an older clone of Chard, and I'm getting a lot of that kind of green grass and, dear, I'm so sorry. Sorry. The kind of green grass, the green apple, and it kind of stays in the green apple realm, where I think some of the newer clones, the Dijon clones that we have of Chardonnay, you can kind of move it towards the yellow, more yellow plum, probably a little more richness and complexity in the finished wine. Pinot Noir to me is again, everything kind of starts in that green grass and goes to the green apple, but the Pinot Noir arrives at that the redder fruit, strawberry, bright strawberry, where you can kind of go, oh yeah, this is it. Pinot Meunier, I have no experience with Pinot Meunier, so that's one I'm kind of eager to learn more about, but I know that it can bring that floral and the aromatic to the wine, so, and at a little lower acidity as well. I think that, you know, it's, the whole point here is to hold off and delay the harvest, try to get that fruit expression as far as you can. Again, going back to why we need cooler sites, why you need to be up on the hillsides. But I think that's really the overall goal, is really to look for how far can we go without sacrificing the acidity, but get the fruit that we're looking for. So I'm, you know, obviously it's a process that I'm still learning. I think this is a lifelong endeavor and I'm starting late. So, you know, I think the potential is so great for here, and Argyle's proven it over and over again. And the rest of us are kind of tagging along now and learning as we go. So that's what I got. I'll hand it to Kate, who actually thinks a lot more deeply about these things. So.
But Louisa, you're so young, you got plenty of time.
Oh yeah, I feel so young.
Thank you, Louisa.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm so, you know, humbled to be amongst this amazing panel today, because truly, like Roland has set the stage for making sparkling wine in the Willamette Valley, and Louise is a dear friend, and we often talk about sparkling and wines in general, and so it's truly my honor to be here. I came to the Willamette Valley in 2007, and I worked for a Pinot producer back then, but I came here from Australia, and I came here with the idea that I always wanted to make sparkling wine. And when I was in Australia, doing my master's, I think I naively threw it out into the universe that I wanted to make sparkling wine. And of course, and at that point I was working part-time while going to school for Petaluma, which Roland is familiar with, and they made Crozer, and they still do. And my husband actually worked there full-time while I was going to school. And one thing about Petaluma, they were very generous with sending bottles home with lowly interns. And so we had, and you know, cellar hands at that point, we had so much Crozer. And so it was just such a formative time for me. I left there saying, I'm gonna go back to the Willamette Valley and I wanna make sparkling wine. And of course, the first thing I do is get a job at a domain that makes only Pinot Noir and had absolutely zero interest in making sparkling wine. I think I had talked about it so many times, let's make sparkling. And to Roland's point is that it takes so much capital and so much time, and you really need to know that going into it. You can't just capriciously fall into making sparkling wine and making a base wine and make it delicious. It takes a lot of planning and a lot of thought ahead of time. So after I left that position, I worked for a French consultant and spent a bit of time in France and in Champagne, and got the opportunity, as I was telling Lynn, to visit Champagne on a regular basis to attend Terre Vent, which is a wonderful tasting where you get to taste the Vin Clair and the current vintage of the sparkling producers. And I really feel like that fortified my love for sparkling wine. So when I came back and was offered a position at Stoller in 2014, and they said, hey, we are looking to start a sparkling program. And I said, great, you know, I threw this out into the universe and you know, almost 10 years ago that I was going to make sparkling wine, and, you know, be careful what you wish for, probably, as Roland might say, right? I think Roland was very instrumental in being like, oh, don't do it. But it's so great. You know, there's a little bit of a fraternity of, not to make it male gender, but there's a group of people that feel very strongly about sparkling, and those of us that do stand on our soapboxes and proselytize to the world, you know, how wonderful it is. And it does, it's a labor of love. And even though I was joking with Lynn earlier that I was joking up here, we're now up to about 3,000 cases of sparkling wine at Stoller. And that it's like, you know, if we made only sparkling wine, my harvest would only be 2 weeks. And then I could re-ingratiate myself to my children. They would remember my face and not give me so much, you know, guilt later. But to that point, you'd have another kind of harvest time during tirage, and another harvest time during disgorgement. So you're really just stretching it out over a period of time. But one of the things that made sparkling wine so accessible to make in the Willamette Valley is really Andrew Davis came in and started an opportunity for producers to make about a small amount of wine without a lot of investment in the equipment. So Andrew Davis came in, and he used to work with Roland at Argyle, and he started his own company called Radiant Sparkling Wine, and he started a mobile tirage bottling and would disgorge your sparkling wine for you. And before that really started in, I think, in earnest in 2013. And before that, you know, a lot of people shied away from making sparkling wine because, you know, I think because Roland said he wouldn't disgorge or tirage for anybody anymore. Is that true, Roland? It's so crazy. So I think a lot of people, when they found out, you know, minimum you could make 400 cases, you had to put out the capital in that you're going to lay down your wine for X amount of time, but you didn't have to invest in gyro pallets, disgorging line, or anything like that. So Andrew really made it accessible. And I think that's why you're seeing so many people in the Willamette Valley making sparkling wine. And to circle back to Roland's point, is that it really truly is a wonderful place for sparkling wine. And because it is at that 45th parallel, and because we have those cooler sites, and because we have cooler nights generally. So that's my long story long. Let's get into my slides. So styles, to Louise's part, I mean, these are the general styles that traditionally people have stuck with, right? So Blanc de Blanc, made exclusively from white grapes, typically in Champagne. It's Chardonnay, Pinot Blanc, a couple other smaller varietals potentially, but really those were the cornerstones. But to Louise's point, since we're in the new world, we can color outside the lines. We are not beholden to making a Blanc de Blanc that is solely Chardonnay and Pinot Blanc, although you find here in the Willamette Valley, people will emulate that. And so the majority of the Blanc de Blancs that you see, although there are not very many, as discovered because we are talking about a forum for the Oregon Chardonnay celebration, looking at Blanc de Blanc, there are not many of us making as many right now, but I think we'll see more in the future. And Blanc de Noir. So Blanc de Noir is made exclusively from red grapes. And it's typically a blend of, you know, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, or 100% of each, or a blend of them together. you know, I'm seeing a lot of Blanc de Noirs. Typically it's, you know, doesn't have much color because it's Blanc de Noir. And to Lisa's point, like you said, you saw a sparkling Dolcetto. Was it pink?
Dolcetto, yes, it was pink. Mhm.
Okay, so that would fall in the rosé category. I'm also seeing a bunch of interesting, we saw a sparkling Nebbiolo as well. I kind of want to line all of these sparklers up and see. That will be our next tasting,
Yes.
I think. And then, yeah, I think very commonly you see a rosé. And so it's a pink version of sparkling wine. It can be made up of white and red grapes. And you can also make it from Saunier, which is generally the process of bleeding off juice from the tank in order to concentrate, you know, increase the concentration, the skin to juice ratio. And Pinot Noir and Saunier, from my experience in Pinot Noir, we made a Saunier rosé as a byproduct. But I know there were a handful of producers here in the Willamette Valley making Saunier. I think Anami being one of them, making a Saunier rosé. I think when Thomas was there speaking with him, he would leave, and Saunier just meaning like allowing the juice to come in contact with macerated skins. He'd leave it on there, I think, for 3 days, which seems like a lot of time in my opinion. So we make a rosé here at Stoller. And so to kind of produce an argument of sorts, like our site, it doesn't have as high of elevation. Our sparkling sections are, you know, towards the top of the hills, around 400, 500 feet. I crop a little bit heavier because I'm not looking for overt concentration, and cropping heavier also allows me to hopefully increase the time that the fruit stays on the vine, and hopefully I'll pick the beginning of September, but usually the end of August. But yeah, so if I were to do, for instance, a Saunier rosé sparkling, I'd have to battle tannin, because in a warmer site, we are on the southernmost tip of the Dundee Hills, still cool by many definitions, but a warmer site to many. I often say we're the Paul Revere of the Dundee Hills. So as soon as I start picking, everybody knows in the Dundee Hills, they have about a week and a half to clean all their tanks and start getting ready, because yeah, we're just an earlier site. And in knowing that and making sparkling wine, I don't want to battle the tannins. So I do pick on the earlier side, and I do crop pretty heavily. In fact, I've chosen the sections and I farm specifically for sparkling because I know those sections can set a lot of fruit, especially in the Pinot Noir. Don't worry as much in the Chardonnay. So our rosé is made from around 80% Pinot Noir. We have 1 acre of Meunier on the property. I'm still getting to know it. I find it to be the juicy core in the center, whereas Pinot Noir is very fleshy. Chardonnay is the acid backbone of the blend, and Meunier is kind of, you know, I want to say the fat in a way. It's just so lovely. I love Meunier. I love sparkling wines that are have a lot of Meunier, and I'm really happy that our Meunier is coming online. So, and then going down my list, there's the advent of non-vintage and multi-vintage wines. And these, I think you're seeing more and more. The majority in the Willamette Valley, I would say, are vintage wines. But I think you're seeing more multi-vintage or non-vintage. And this is something that I think is so commonplace in Champagne, because they had a lot of marginal years and they wanted to have that reserve wine held back. We're making a non-vintage here at Stoller, and I'm holding back reserve wines in order to add complexity later, because our time on lees is shorter. So I don't have that like over 3 years for the non-vintage. And it comes down to winemaking decisions and styles, which is a great segue. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So I was speaking to somebody recently. There's so many winemaking decisions, so many micro decisions that will impact the resulting wine. And a friend of mine likened it to branches of a tree, right? Even though you may give winemakers the exact same fruit, potentially picked at the same time, those decisions will kind of branch off into any given moment and produce something completely different. So some of the decisions that we make when thinking about sparkling wine, what vessel are you going to ferment it in? I mean, besides picking and how much fruit you're going to leave on the vine in terms of the yields, I think, well, one picking decision is the hardest decision. And I'm going to circle back because just to talk about this vintage, as we were talking about earlier, it was a warmer vintage, like Roland said, and we had these tremendous heat events. Luckily, it was earlier in the season. I was truly expecting the acidity to just drop. And we did have warmer temperatures at night. But what really struck me and made this vintage so interesting is that we didn't have these east winds that came in right before harvest that usually the vine respires all the acidity. And so I was finding that even though I was picking for sparkling at like 19 bricks, my total acidity was at like 13 or 12. And so it was such an interesting vintage in that way. And I found that same thing with the Chardonnay. In that we weren't losing acidity as fast as we normally do. And that's primarily why I would pick early, is because of that degradation of acidity. And so this year it was so remarkable. It's like, oh my God, okay, we still picked early. I mean, it wasn't quite the earliest that we've ever picked, but we picked mid-August because we are a warmer site. But I was really pleased with the natural acidity that we had just throughout the entire vintage. So it was a renaissance of sorts. So back to styles and winemaking. So the vessel, there's a lot of people, again, we're not beholden to any sort of traditional style, but in emulating champagne, a lot of people will choose barrel for fermentation. The majority of what I make is fermented in neutral barrel. We have started playing around with new oak a little bit, dipping our toe in the water of getting 600-liter thick stave, really lightly toasted pungens. And so those are been an amazing inclusion into our barrel program. And then some people I know have added a little bit of concrete fermented juice into their blends. Also, some people will age in that vessel for a longer period of time, rather than to get that complexity and get that autolysis in the yeast earlier on, rather than putting it to bottle after 9 months or a year. For us here at Stoller, we tirage we always tirage in the spring or in the early summer. And for our Leroux's, which you can see behind me, we leave on these for 3 years, 3 to 4 years. And then for a non-vintage, it's about 18 months. And then the question of commercial yeast. I mean, I think for me, for sparkling, I do inoculate with a commercial yeast because sparkling wine is so transparent. You don't want to, if you have any off characteristics, once you promote the secondary fermentation, it's just going to elevate anything that is remotely off. So I use commercial yeast for that. For the rest of the wines here in this facility, we choose native. But really for sparkling, I choose commercial yeast. For malolactic and then the next decision, malolactic fermentation, do you have so much acidity that you want to kind of take away some of that tart green apple characteristics and promote a mallow and promote at least some partial malt fermentation. For me, I do a little bit of a partial. I do not add sulfur until a little bit right before. Actually, I don't add any sulfur until we add the dose later. I'm looking at I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna quickly go through this and we'll go to the dose trials. Yeah, and then of course your decision how long you want to leave your wine on lees. So these over time are gonna really give you like their texture. So you have that high acidity, and the breakdown of these over time is going to provide that really lovely brioche, yeasty textural feel in the bottle, which is, you know, one of the decisions. So adding color in the form of still wine, that first picture in the previous slide, that was actually a color trial. And we do that every year. When you do a secondary fermentation, the yeast absorbs some of the color. And so we don't necessarily, as you can see, our rosé isn't that pink, and that is by design, but having a little bit color before it goes on, before it gets laid down for 3 years is really beneficial, because then it's not, has just like a kiss of color. So we do this every year just to see, and we may add like 0.5% of still wine to our base wine before we rush it. Okay, then we can skip right ahead to 2. One more. Oh, there we go back, sorry. Okay, dosage decisions. So one of my favorite quotes from Peter Liam, he basically said adding dosage is like adding salt when cooking. And I firmly believe this, because you're adding a dosage to balance out the wine, much like you're adding salt to balance out the flavors of cooking. So when I think about adding a dosage, it's to balance out the acidity that we have, or bring out the flavors and the aromas. So I'm not looking to make it sweet. I think that's a common misperception. And there's some years, you know, all of us winemakers are like, oh, we're going to make a brut nature, we're going to do 0 dosage. And you know, as things get warmer, it's possible, and perhaps the longer you leave it on lees over time, you may not have to have, you might already have that richness. But I feel like a dose trial is always such a great opportunity to taste everything blind and see what brings out the best balance. When looking at what you're going to add, we've gone through lots of different exercises and adding different types of sugar to our dose trials. We've done even honey, we've done brown sugar and cane sugar, and MCR, which is something that is sometimes used in champagne as well. It is rectified concentrated must usually from white grapes. In France, it's taken from the Languedoc. And it does provide a different perception of the sweetness. Now, you're not adding a lot of wine, you know, you're adding, the sugar tends to be, you know, between 1 gram to, I mean, if you're making a brut, like 8 grams, but you're adding just enough to balance it. And I think what's so interesting in going through the process of the dose trials and looking at the different types of sugar, and also choosing the vehicle wine for it. Even that small amount of wine for our rosé, we use a little bit of still rosé that we have, and adding that sugar and adding it really makes a difference. I say this even with blending, doing blend trials for our still wines, 1%, and you're adding much less than that in your dose, but even the smallest amount is going to impact your final blend. So, and I think we've seen that over time. And so my last point being disgorgement dates. So again, if you have the opportunity to have multiple disgorgement dates, much like they do in small growers in Champagne, and you can do a little bit of time. And what I love is tasting wines. I'm in a Champagne tasting group, and we taste wines blindly on a regular basis, and we'll set a theme, and everybody will sometimes bring the same wine but different disgorgement dates, and there's a thread of continuity, but there is a difference. And I've thought about that now that we have our ability to disgorge in-house, is that, you know, disgorging a little bit at a time to, you know, get something out into the market, but then leaving some back just for another 6 months to a year really allows further autolysis and kind of further development in a positive way to the wine. So I'm running out of time because I ramble, and thank you for sticking with me, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So that was the long and the short of it.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, let me just stop the share, and we'll just on to any questions anybody has. Liz was asking about, she's intrigued, is Bollinger intended to concentrate on still wines at Fonzie, Louisa?
Yes, that is their intent. Yes.
Okay.
Can you expand on that a bit more?
Well,
Is it seeing it as not really a suitable area for sparkling wine, or is it just a different way of getting into the American market?
exactly. No, I don't think it has anything to do with the ability to make great sparkling wine here. I think that's been acknowledged by Etienne Bizot, whose father Christian talked to Rollin early on. There's been they've been impressed with the sparkling wines that are coming from the Willamette Valley for a very long time. No, I think it has more to do with their focus of their, what their intentions are. And yes, to get a foot into the American market, it was a big step for them, and to find a winery that kind of matched their ideals. There's a lot that we have in common. And I think, for them, they wanted to have a foothold in Oregon, in the Willamette Valley, very important to them, and the ability to kind of expand their other properties here in the US.
Thank you. But that takes us possibly onto a bigger subject. The overall Willamette Valley, I'm very ignorant on it. Is sparkling still only a very tiny proportion of what's made, or? And what's the future?
Sparkling is very teeny tiny, and I felt like one hand clapping in the woods for a very, very, very long time. It was Argyle and another fellow that I dearly love, Soder, was making a small amount recently. One of the longest makers, and that's it. And as Kate alluded to, the reason was multiple reasons, because it's tougher to make a well-balanced world class. Remember, world class. We're a teeny tiny region, and I'm always impressed how far and wide we've managed to export our wines. Like, for example, we're in the UK, and it's pretty neat, but we're teeny tiny. But most of that export has been red wine Pinot Noir, which was kind of low hanging fruit in the world. If you follow that 45th parallel line around, there's very, very few regions above 45 in the Southern Hemisphere or Northern that make Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So all of us are very small producers. But sparkling wine's going to come on. Like Kate mentioned, we have a mobile expertise available to us now, and people will get their feet wet, and just by chance, someone sometime is going to move in here like Argyle and go, you know what, we're here just to make sparkling wine. Be really bloody serious about it.
You're clearly quite a tight-knit group of people, but how many producers do produce the sparkling wine?
Oh my. Gals?
I don't know. I mean, we do a sparkling kind of technical seminar every year, and I think the last time we had it, Kate, I don't know, there must be over 70 producers. I would say very small, very, very small production. A lot of people are doing that 300-400 case level. So there's not a big investment yet.
No, I mean, I feel like every time I see there's a sparkling report that came out, and every time I look at it, it's like, oh, there's far more producers than I even realized, right? And so I think people are realizing, especially having a sparkling in their tasting room is so beneficial to start the tasting, and people will buy it. And I've spoken to about this with Andrew, is like he really wants a Willamette Valley Sparkling to be in the national market. But and to Rollin's point, there hasn't been somebody other than Argyle and Soder to a degree, but who has really championed enough sparkling wine to make a firm footprint, nationally and globally. But I think it's coming for sure. Sparkling is a hot segment in sales right now, both in Oregon and in the national market. So I think we'll see it coming online. So yeah, I know there's quite a few of us that are doing it, but right now people are still a little nervous because of the capital output. So yeah, it's, but I don't know, let's do this in another couple of years and the story will probably be completely different.
Yeah, little by little, and Rocco with the RMS brute, I've been really impressed. We do about 2,000 cases, and we're growing double digit. And I've been really impressed with the embracement of our sparkling wine at a champagne level price point into Canada and into, of course, the U.S. and a number of places. Alabama, for example, who would have thought? And then Asian markets. So it's it's going to be something exciting. I kind of want to circle back before you ask another question. Again, the Willamette Valley, above the 45th parallel, next to the Pacific Ocean, we get this evolution of fruit that happens slower than it will in lower latitudes. And Kate, you mentioned, we put on more, a higher yield in our vineyard, but still that yield is no more than 4 or 5 tons to the acre, where if you're in Sonoma, the average would be 8 to 9 tons to the acre. And so we cannot ripen and be competitive for price with lower latitude regions. We're always going to be smaller yield compared to those regions. And but then we're going to get this evolution of flavor that the window for picking sparkling wine is incredibly narrow. You can pick it too early and it'll be green and insipid, and you pick it too late and it'll be flabby and strawberry and all that kind of stuff. So that apple, pear, plum with high natural acidity is really tough to get in most regions, but here we do have time to get it just right. Just like when our seasons change, we get real seasons, we get real grape flavor development that winemakers can pick up on and be successful with our base wines. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Question. Both Louisa and Kate mentioned how much you like Pinot Meunier. So I wanted to ask about that. But first of all, I wanted to show you a bottle which I inherited from a wine collection, a very good friend who died last year. So this is a Willamette still Pinot Meunier, and you probably can't see the, it's 2008.
Yeah.
And it has a script cap. So I'm actually using this in a tasting I'm hosting in 2 weeks of wines from the 2000s. So no idea what it's going to be like, but I'm really great to find out. So I guess, Pinot Meunier in Champagne is generally considered the least good quality, and it's not used that much in vintage Champagne. So I'm just interested to hear more from you about why you like it, what you like about it, and how you consider it ages.
Well, I'm going to pass to Kate and Ron, who actually have experience with Pinot Meunier, because I haven't had the privilege to work with it yet. So.
Go ahead, Kate. I have a lot of experience, but you should go first.
I don't have as much experience as Roland. I have 1 acre on our property, and it's still, we planted it in 2016. And so we're just now incorporating it into our blends. And so I've always really enjoyed Meunier, and I think there are a handful of producers in Champagne, Musée being one of them, and they really focus on Meunier. And I think they've championed and that varietal and have established that it can age. It's just different, right? So when you think about, I think about wines as in terms of shapes pretty frequently, and whereas Pinot Noir is, it can kind of span the length of the palate in both horizontal and vertical kind of planes, and the Chardonnay is more like an arrow vertically across the palate. The Meunier is like the juicy core, and I really enjoy that. I think it brings a lot of balance to the wine. And so while I don't have enough Meunier to make a still Meunier, or to make a wine that's only Meunier at this point for sparkling, I don't know, we'll see down the line, but I'll defer to Ron because he has had Meunier much longer than I have.
My long running joke is that Pinot Meunier is hamburger helper for Champagne. And the way that you explain that is that all the lesser regions, and Champagne's expanding their region, they just plant Meunier because it's not warm enough to ripen Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And if you have a Grand Cru vineyard that's forever been Chardonnay or Pinot Noir, you're not going to replant it with Meunier. But having said that, I planted 16 acres of Pinot Meunier for Argyle in our new Spirit Hill Vineyard high elevation site. And the reason I did that is because I discovered, at least from my point of view, Pinot Meunier has a beautiful floral rose petal component that's really attractive to me when it's used in our rosé. And it's a great contributor in that regard. Meunier is designed to look older earlier. That's probably makes the middle palate a bit juicier because of that. Lower acid. It doesn't mean that it doesn't age, but if you make an all brut Meunier, it will look like it's been on yeast lees for a bit longer than a Pinot Noir or a Chardonnay. So that's my jokes about Pinot Meunier, and there is a future for it, and we just have to plant a little bit more.
That's intriguing because here in England, there's some people doing some very interesting things with Pinot Meunier, both still wines and sparkling wines.
Sure. Shout out to Wendy and Charles Oathwhite, good buddies. They're in Old Blighty, growing great sparkling wine.
Great news.
Well, I guess we've come to the end of our time. Thank you all very, very much indeed. It's fascinating. And it's certainly an area that looks as though it's going to have an important future in sparkling wine. Probably never on a huge scale, but it just adds to the variety of fine wines there are throughout the world. Thank you very much for telling us about it.
You bet.